The moment I walked into Hartwell Community Bank that Thursday morning, I thought the hardest part of my week was already behind me. I had buried my husband of 41 years just 6 days before. I had stood at his graveside in the November cold, held my granddaughter's hand, and told myself that Arthur would have wanted me to be strong. I believed I was strong. I believed I knew exactly what I was doing when I sat down across from my son to review the estate paperwork. Have you ever been absolutely certain about something, completely at peace with a decision, only to have a complete stranger look at you with such raw, unguarded fear in her eyes that every cell in your body suddenly screamed that you had gotten everything wrong? That is what happened to me at 10:47 inches the morning, in the third office on the left at Hartwell Community Bank, when a young teller named Brooke set a folder down in front of me and whispered, "Mrs. Calloway, please don't sign anything yet. I need you to listen to me. Right now. Before he comes back." She glanced over her shoulder toward the hallway where my son had gone to take a phone call. Her hands were shaking, and I remember thinking, she is genuinely terrified. Not nervous, not anxious. Terrified. So I listened. What she told me in the next 4 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. And what she showed me afterward on her personal phone, a recording she had almost deleted the night before, sent my son and his wife to federal prison. My name is Margaret Calloway. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a high school English teacher in Dayton, Ohio. I am not a dramatic person. I do not exaggerate. And everything I am about to tell you is the truth. Arthur and I were married in 1983. We were not wealthy people. Arthur drove a delivery truck for a pharmaceutical distributor for most of his working life, and I taught school. We were careful, though. We saved. We paid off the house on Clover Ridge Lane in 2009. We put money into retirement accounts every single year without fail. By the time Arthur was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease 3 years ago, we had built something modest but real. The house, appraised at just under $400,000. A retirement portfolio worth a little over $800,000. A life insurance policy for $250,000. In total, somewhere close to $1.4 million in combined assets. Not a fortune by some people's standards, but enough to matter. Enough, apparently, to make someone very dangerous. Arthur and I had 2 children. Our daughter, Renee, lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband and their 2 kids. She calls every Sunday. She flew home for every one of Arthur's chemotherapy appointments when the Parkinson's progressed and they found the additional complications. She is the kind of person who sends handwritten thank you notes and remembers your coffee order. Our son, Derek, is 40 years old. He lives 20 minutes from the house I still live in. He and his wife, Cassandra, have been married for 9 years. They do not have children. Derek worked in pharmaceutical sales for a while, then started a small investment consulting business that, as far as I could tell, never quite took off the way he described it taking off. He drove a car that was too expensive for his income and took vacations that did not match what I knew of his financial situation. Arthur noticed it too. We talked about it privately, more than once, the way parents do when they are worried but do not want to start a conflict. When Arthur's condition worsened in the final year, Derek became suddenly very present. He offered to help manage finances. He offered to drive Arthur to appointments. He called more. He came by the house more. At the time, I was grateful. I was exhausted and scared, and watching my husband disappear slowly and having my son close by felt like a blessing. I know now that I was watching a performance. 4 weeks before Arthur died, Derek sat us both down and suggested we update the estate documents. He had a recommendation, he said, for a financial planner named Gary Whitmore who specialized in end-of-life estate transitions. Arthur was having a good day, mentally clear, and he agreed to the meeting. I agreed too. It seemed responsible. Gary Whitmore came to the house twice. He was polished, professional, and thorough. He presented a revised estate plan that would consolidate the assets, simplify the trust structure, and Derek explained, reduce the tax burden on the estate by restructuring how the assets transferred. The new documents named Derek as the sole successor trustee, replacing the arrangement Arthur and I had set up years earlier that split responsibilities equally between Derek and Renee. Arthur signed the revised documents on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen making tea. I did not read them carefully enough. I did not ask enough questions. That is the thing that still keeps me awake sometimes, not the anger at what was done, but the awareness of how easily I failed to see it. Arthur passed away on a Monday, peacefully, at home, which is what he wanted. On Saturday, 6 days later, Derek called and said that Gary Whitmore needed one additional signature from me on the asset transfer authorization before the estate could move forward. He would drive me to the bank himself. It would take 20 minutes. I said yes. I got dressed in the navy blazer Arthur always said made me look like I meant business. I got in my son's car. I had no idea that Renee had called Derek the night before, asking questions about the revised trust documents that she had only just seen. I had no idea that Derek had told her she was being hysterical and paranoid and that grief was making her irrational. I had no idea that Renee had then called Gary Whitmore directly and that Gary Whitmore had not called her back. And I had absolutely no idea that a 26-year-old bank teller named Brooke Daniels had overheard a conversation she was never supposed to hear. Brooke had worked at Hartwell Community Bank for 3 years. She processed routine transactions, helped customers with account questions, and occasionally assisted with document signings when the bank's notary was busy. She was, by her own description, nobody important. She was working late the previous Wednesday evening when Derek and Gary Whitmore came in after hours to meet with the branch manager, a man named Phil Torrance, who had apparently known Derek for years through a local business networking group. Brooke was in the small break room adjacent to the conference room where the three of them met. The walls at Hartwell Community Bank are not thick. She heard Derek say, clearly and without lowering his voice nearly enough, that his mother was, quote, not really tracking everything the way she used to, and that she would sign whatever was put in front of her as long as he was there to guide her through it. She heard Gary Whitmore ask about the daughter in Portland, and she heard Derek say that Renee was already dealt with. She heard Phil Torrance say, just make sure the signatures are clean. I don't want any questions from compliance. Brooke went home that night and could not sleep. She did not know who these men were talking about. She did not know if what she had heard was actually illegal or just deeply unpleasant. She is not a lawyer. She is a 26-year-old bank teller who grew up in a small town outside of Columbus and whose grandmother had been swindled out of her savings by a dishonest contractor 2 years prior. She knew what it felt like to watch a family member be taken advantage of. She knew what that particular kind of helplessness looked like. She did something that most people would not have done. She opened the voice memo app on her phone and she recorded the last portion of the conversation through the break room wall. She did not know if it would ever be useful. She told me later that she almost deleted it 3 times. She told me she kept asking herself whether she was overreacting, whether she had misunderstood, whether it was any of her business. She told me that the morning I walked in with my son, she almost convinced herself to stay quiet. Then she looked at my face. She said I looked like someone who trusted everything around them completely. She said I reminded her of her grandmother, and something in her would not let her stay in her chair. Derek stepped out to answer a call from Cassandra. The moment he turned the corner, Brooke came around the counter, sat down across from me, and told me in a rapid, controlled whisper what she had heard 3 nights earlier. She told me about Phil Torrance. She told me what Derek had said about me not tracking things. She told me she had a recording. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It was not immediate conviction. It was not a sudden clarity where everything snapped into focus and I knew exactly what was true. What I felt was a very quiet, very cold sensation moving from the center of my chest outward, like someone had opened a window in January. And underneath that coldness was a memory, Arthur, about 2 weeks before he died, on one of his harder days, reaching for my hand and saying, Maggie, don't let Derek rush you into anything after I'm gone. Promise me you'll call Renee first. And I had said, of course, and changed the subject because I did not want to think about after he was gone. I had not called Renee first. I had not called Renee at all. I asked Brooke, very quietly, how much time we had. She checked the hallway. Derek was still on his phone near the front entrance, his back to us. She pulled out her own phone and played me 43 seconds of audio. I heard Derek's voice. I had heard that voice at every Christmas dinner for 40 years. I had heard it say, I love you, Mom, and thank you for everything, and don't worry, I'll handle it. I heard that same voice say, she won't question it. She's been off since the funeral. Just get the transfer authorization signed today and we can move the investment accounts within 72 hours. Once it's done, it's done. I heard Gary Whitmore say, and the sister? I heard my son say, Renee gets the house. That was always the plan. She just doesn't know the portfolio is already redirected. $850,000 in 72 hours. I looked at Brooke. I was aware that my hands were very still, which seemed strange given what I was feeling. I said, "What do I do?" She had already written a name and phone number on a deposit slip. She slid it across the desk to me. "This is my cousin. She's an elder law attorney. She's 10 minutes from here. I already texted her this morning. She's waiting." My son walked back into the room. He set his phone in his jacket pocket and smiled at me, the smile I had known his whole life, and he said, "Sorry about that, Mom. Ready to get this wrapped up?" I looked at him for a long moment. 40 years of birthday cakes, 40 years of goodnight kisses and homework help and driving to baseball practice in the dark, 40 years of loving this person completely and without reservation. I said, "Actually, Derek, I'm not feeling well. I think I need some water in a few minutes." He frowned. "Mom, it'll only take a minute. You just need to sign the transfer authorization. Gary's waiting." "Gary can wait a few minutes," I said. "I need to use the restroom." I walked to the back of the bank. Brooke was already at the end of the hallway, door to the small office open. I stepped inside. She closed the door behind me. I called the number on the deposit slip. Her name was Claire Okafor. She had been practicing elder law in Dayton for 11 years. She answered on the second ring, and in the 14 minutes that followed, while my son waited for me near the front of the bank and I sat in a small back office with the door closed, Claire walked me through exactly what I was dealing with. The transfer authorization I was about to sign was not a routine estate document. It was a direction of investment letter that would move the retirement portfolio, Arthur's and mine, $850,000 into a private investment account controlled entirely by Derek's consulting firm. Once signed and processed, the transfer could be completed within 48 to 72 hours. It would not be illegal on its face because I would have signed it voluntarily. The legality hinged entirely on whether I had signed it with full understanding and without undue influence. The answer to both of those questions, Claire said, was obviously no. She told me not to sign anything. She told me to leave the bank without explaining myself if possible. She told me to call Renee immediately. And she told me to preserve Brooke's recording and any other documentation I could get my hands on. Then she said something that I did not expect. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, I want you to be prepared for the possibility that this involves more than your son. The bank manager's involvement, if what you've described is accurate, may constitute financial elder abuse with institutional facilitation. That is a federal matter." I walked back to the front of the bank. My son was standing near the teller windows, checking his phone. He looked up when he heard my footsteps and smiled again. "Better?" "A little," I said. "Derek, I've been thinking. I'd like to have Renee on a call before I sign anything. I know she's in Portland, but it would make me feel better to have both of you involved." The smile changed. It did not disappear, but something shifted behind it. "Mom, Renee doesn't need to be involved in this. She's already getting the house. This is just a technical transfer." "I'd like to wait," I said. "I'd like to call your sister." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with a careful evenness that I recognized as his controlled voice, the voice he used when he was angry but did not want to show it, "Fine, we can reschedule." He drove me home in near silence. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the streets of Dayton go by and thought about Arthur telling me not to let Derek rush me. I thought about how I had changed the subject. I called Renee from my bedroom before Derek's car had even left the driveway. She picked up and said, "Mom, I have been trying to reach you. I've been so worried." And she started crying. And then I started crying. And we talked for an hour and 40 minutes. And by the end of it, we had agreed on 3 things. We would contact Claire Okafor together first thing Monday morning. We would not alert Derek that anything had changed. And Renee would fly in from Portland on Sunday. What happened next moved faster than I expected. Claire filed an emergency petition with the probate court on Monday afternoon, requesting a temporary freeze on all estate assets, pending investigation of potential undue influence and financial elder abuse. The petition cited Brooke's recording, The timeline of the revised trust documents signed while Arthur was in the final weeks of a terminal illness and the suspicious involvement of Phil Torrance, the bank manager, in an after-hours meeting that had no documented business purpose. The probate judge granted the temporary freeze by Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, investigators from the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit had made contact with Claire's office. What they found when they looked more closely was worse than I had understood. Gary Whitmore was not a licensed financial planner. His certification had lapsed 4 years ago following a complaint filed against him in Michigan. He had a pattern of targeting widowed or recently bereaved spouses, typically through referrals from trusted family members. He had done this before, in 2 other counties, though neither case had resulted in charges because neither family had been willing to pursue prosecution. Phil Torrance had received a referral fee, $8,000, paid through a Shell LLC connected to Derek's consulting firm for facilitating the after-hours meeting and expediting the transfer authorization paperwork through the bank's internal processing queue without flagging it for compliance review. And Derek and Cassandra had been spending money they did not have for nearly 3 years. The consulting business had not had a single paying client in 18 months. They owed $240,000 on investment accounts that had dropped sharply. They were behind on the lease for their office space. Cassandra had made 3 wire transfers totaling $60,000 to a private account in the 14 months before Arthur died. Derek had begun the process of approaching Gary Whitmore 8 months before his father's death. 8 months. He had been planning this while Arthur was still alive. While I was sitting at hospital bedsides and learning how to manage medication schedules and telling myself how grateful I was to have my son nearby, I will not tell you that I did not grieve this. I did. I sat on the edge of my bed the night the investigators told me the full timeline, and I cried in a way I had not cried since Arthur died. Not for the money, for the years, for the 1,000 small moments I had believed were real and was now forced to look at differently, for the person I thought my son was. Renee sat next to me the whole time. She did not say anything for a long while. Then she said, "Mom, Derek is responsible for what Derek did. You are not responsible for trusting your child." I have thought about that sentence almost every day since. Derek was arrested on 3 counts of financial elder abuse, 1 count of attempted wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy. Cassandra was arrested separately on 2 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of money laundering related to the transfers she had made prior to Arthur's death. Phil Torrance was arrested the same week on charges of bank fraud and elder financial exploitation. Gary Whitmore was picked up in Michigan, where he had apparently gone to visit family after learning that something had gone wrong with the Callaway transaction. He was extradited back to Ohio and charged with 8 counts, including 2 from the earlier cases that investigators were able to reopen using the evidence from my case. Derek pled guilty 6 months later. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Cassandra received 2 years and significant financial penalties. Phil Torrance lost his banking license and received an 18-month sentence. Gary Whitmore, given his history and the number of victims across multiple cases, received 7 years. The estate was fully restored. The revised trust documents were voided by the probate court. The original equal distribution between Derek and Renee was reinstated, though Derek's share is being held pending restitution calculations. Renee and I have since worked with a legitimate estate attorney, someone Claire recommended, someone who had no prior relationship with anyone in my family, to restructure everything clearly and transparently. I still live in the house on Clover Ridge Lane. Arthur's chair is still in the living room. I have not been able to move it yet, and I am not sure I need to. Brooke Daniels left Hartwell Community Bank shortly after Phil Torrance's arrest. The bank, as an institution, was placed under regulatory review, and several internal processes were overhauled. Brooke was offered a position at a credit union across town, where I am told she is doing very well. I sent her a card when I heard. Then I called her, because a card did not feel like enough. I told her that what she did took real courage. She said, "I just kept thinking about my grandmother. I kept thinking, I wish someone had done this for her." I think about that a lot. How many Brookes are out there, overhearing things they were not supposed to hear, almost talking themselves out of getting involved? How many of them delete the recording? She almost deleted it 3 times. I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who is in the middle of a loss right now, who is grieving and exhausted and leaning on the people closest to them to help carry the weight of it all. What happened to me is not a reason to distrust everyone around you. Arthur was right to tell me not to let anyone rush me. But there were also people, Brooke, Claire, Renee, the investigators who took this seriously, who showed up with real integrity at the moments that mattered most. The world is full of both kinds of people. The lesson is not to stop trusting. The lesson is to slow down enough to tell the difference. When I walked into Hartwell Community Bank that Thursday morning, I believed I was doing what Arthur would have wanted me to do. I believed I was being responsible and practical and moving forward the way people do when they have no choice but to move forward. I was wrong about almost everything. The papers were wrong. The person sitting across from me in the car was wrong. My certainty was wrong. But the one thing that was not wrong, the one instinct that turned out to matter more than anything, was the moment I looked at a 26-year-old bank teller whose hands were shaking and whose eyes were foremost-downed, frightened, and I decided she was worth listening to. That 10-second decision saved everything Arthur and I spent a lifetime building. More than that, it saved me from spending the rest of my life not knowing. Because I will tell you something. The money, as significant as it was, is not the thing that would have broken me. The thing that would have broken me is having signed those papers and never found out. Living the rest of my life, believing Derek was the son I thought he was, never understanding why certain things didn't add up, never having the real story. I have the real story now. It is not a good story, but it is mine. And knowing it, even the parts that hurt, is better than the comfortable lie I was being handed one signature at a time. Arthur used to say that the truth has a weight to it that makes you steadier, not heavier. I did not fully understand that when he said it. I think I understand it now. If you are navigating estate paperwork or end-of-life documents for someone you love, please do not do it alone. Get an independent attorney, not someone referred by a family member who stands to benefit. Have a trusted person outside the immediate situation review anything you sign. And if anyone at all tries to make you feel rushed or confused or like asking questions is somehow a burden, that is the moment to slow all the way down and ask them anyway. I am 67 years old. I spent my career teaching teenagers that words have consequences and that paying attention is a form of respect. Turns out I needed to apply that lesson to my own life in the hardest possible way. I am still here. The house on Clover Ridge Lane is still standing. Renee calls every Sunday, same as always, and now she calls a little longer. My granddaughter is learning to bake, and last weekend she made a pie crust from scratch that was, if I am being honest, significantly better than mine at her age. Spring is coming. There is a trip to Asheville that Renee and I have been talking about since February. Arthur would say I earned it. I think he would be right. Thank you for listening to this story. If it helped even one person slow down before signing something they did not fully understand, or take seriously the fear in a stranger's eyes, then it was worth every word. I will see you in the next one.